Hi, everyone. My name is Angel. I use they and she pronouns. Just a little bit of a content warning. We are going to be talking about sexual assault, abuse, and victim blaming, as this has a huge role, unfortunately, in why ASPECC even came to be in the first place. If you're in the kink community, you can find me as a rope devil in FetLife, and you can read the longer version of this. Yeah, so big breath. So years ago, I moved to Edmonton just to be more active in the local kink community here. Came from a smaller area. Um, Moving here meant a lot to me. I mean, it started out as a health thing and moved here, but being able to have access to that grander community was a huge part of the draw for both myself and my partner. And kind of makes me laugh, but I'm going to call it being a part of the mainstream BDSM community. Um, there were some mainstream groups, and I was active in pretty much all of them. I had moved here, was working on bachelor's of psychology. I was earning money as a professional dominatrix and living with the other co-founder, who is also, my daddy dom. And we chose to move to Edmonton to access healthcare that we couldn't get in northern BC, and this city in particular, because we had friends in the kink community here and mentors. And we had been actively volunteering here for local kink friendly events. When we were living up north, we housed a lot of educational opportunities for our own local community based on what we learned coming out to conferences and places like Edmonton. So, yay for that, right? And if you're part of any subculture community, you know what I'm talking about when I say it's like family, right? Shortly after we moved here, we were invited to present for Lupercalia, which is a sister organization to Edmonton O Society. These two groups are some of the still oldest existing kink groups in Alberta. And one of their very active presenters, a board member and a volunteer, chose to continuously and unrelentingly engage in inappropriate behaviors with me. If you're, like I said, on my FetLife profile, just check out the story. If it walks like a predator, it's a really long story. But this went on like over years, and most of the contact, if taken just one thing on its own, is startling and inappropriate, absolutely, but not it doesn't sum up the weight of all of those interactions piling on top of each other. And the long and the short of it is we were supposed to be, well, we actually ended up doing it, but we were presenting at another Lupercalia. We were selling some product, and he came up behind me, jerked my body against him, wrapped his arm around my neck, and I guess kissed the back of my head. And it was so suddenly and unexpected that when he let go, I actually fell on my ass and I was sitting on my knees. So if that gives you an idea of how that worked. And I've got flashbulb memories of it. So I can't really tell you exactly what happened, like step by step sort of thing, but I do know that the people around me were like still in the process of physically trying to react to that when he walked away and was like nothing happened, like chatting with us over his shoulder as he walked away, and we just all sat there in shock. Like it was something else. And that wasn't the only interaction that we had at that at that conference. Pardon me, I'm trying to like, smile and stuff, but like this shit's not easy to speak about. And we ended up dropping out of the community over this. A lot of the interactions were very sexually inappropriate, and often included him abusing his position of power as, the person he reported to as a volunteer, for example. And it was just, we struggled so much with how the community responded to it more so than what he did. And I think what he did merits a trauma response all on its own. Over the months that followed, because we talked to the leaders of the organization, we tried reaching out, ended up reporting it to the police, because you just wouldn't leave me alone. And people started approaching me and telling me about instances in which they'd also been assaulted. After I posted up that Walks Like a Predator, I received over 120 messages from people who had also, and I didn't name him, and they were able to recognize him from some of his pet behaviors that he has, for being an assaulting piece of shit. So, anyways, many of them couldn't speak up about the experience because of their employment, their ties to the community, their own mental health reasons. So, I want to be really clear that reporting it to the police is not an easy thing, and we shouldn't be expecting victims to have to do that in order to validate them. Okay. I was in a position where I felt like I could, so I did. And the weight of all those people reporting to me definitely encouraged me to do that. But everybody should be able to choose for themselves whether or not they share their story, and that needs to be okay. Um, the trauma experience actually had me switching my major from child development. I've got a child who's on the spectrum, so I had always intended to be the person you come to that helps you get that assessment, matches you up with the resources. But I switched entirely to sexual trauma. I took courses in criminology, sociology, psychology, and even philosophy, trying to tease out sorry, what supports sexually assaulting behaviors in society. And then I wrote that post. And it felt like the community fell apart after I wrote that post. It went viral, which I'd never had happen before and wasn't intending for it to happen. I was just sharing my voice, but people from all over the world were commenting on it, which was pretty intimidating. And I didn't write it with the intentions of ripping apart the community. I wrote it because I was frustrated and hurt. I followed the rules. I reported the behavior like I was told to. I was told to deal with it myself. I tried avoiding him, and it just didn't matter. I still ended up being assaulted several times, and the people in charge of the space were hesitant to do anything about it for lots of reasons, none of them really valid. The belief that people make stories up and all those victim blaming and silencing ideas that we hold in society really came to the forefront in my community. And I'm sure they feared losing the support of his friends and their friends if they stood up against this individual. And Mark and I know from our own experience here at ASPECC that community support can make or break an organization. People kind of like split up into two camps. There were those who'd been exposed to the creepy, non-consensual behavior of the person who assaulted me, and those that felt I had my own responsibility to prevent it from happening. And, maybe I just wasn't mature enough to be in the community at all, or that I made the whole thing up, or like whatever. And some of those two camps, I get people always coming up to me and going, no, 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 there was also the camp that didn't know what to do. And I was like, if you didn't know what to do, if you didn't speak up, you were in the camp that was part of the problem. Like, I'm sorry, but like silence is violence in these situations. Like, there's no neutral when it comes to, do people have the right to their own bodies or not? Myself, several supporters, we were sitting around talking, and we thought, wouldn't it be great if there was just a place where people could take their events without having to hide what they were doing, right? Because a lot of these spaces, they would rent halls and lie about what they were hosting, like get insurance as like art production and stuff like that, theater arts often, which if somebody got hurt, like your insurance isn't even going to cover that. And wouldn't that just be great to have a place where you could do that and have a consensual framework for people to follow, have written policies for what to do when there's known persons with multiple assaulting behaviors, how to keep them out of the community without risking that community displeasure. And our thought was, if we had an organization like that was willing to be the bad guy and go, look, you did this, you can't come here. There's other places you can go. Here's not one of them. That it would be easier for groups like Edmonton O Society, Lupercalia, and all the rest of them to host their stuff and go, it's not our fault, right? Like, there's that diffusion. You can pass the buck. We spent the next 2 years, we talked to educators, advocates from Compass Sexual Health and Wellness Center, for example, HIV Edmonton, the Pride Center. We had meetings with Sexual Assault Center, and we gathered as much information as we could and as many certificates as I could to make sure that I was really picking up on the information. We worked with the police. We built a list of protocols based on the things that people in fields of expertise brought to us about this. And we found the space, and there we were. And when we opened, there were a few groups that did choose to bring their events to ASPECC, but a lot of groups chose not to, which is fine, but it did leave us with nearly 5,000 square feet that wasn't being used. So we ended up hosting our own events to fill the space, to be able to pay for the space. And we started with Taste of Kink. Mark and I started offering classes on how to do all of those things safely and how to negotiate for people's consent. And people started showing up and asking for more classes on consent, and also looking for how to ask for sex, how to set and navigate boundaries, how to explore fantasies. And at that time, I just completed my sex coach certification, and I started building workshops, and universities started reaching out and going, "Can you provide us content?" And Taboo reached out and asked us if we could provide content there. And then queer people came and they were like, "Hey, we want variations on these services specific for us." And I was only figuring out my queerness at that point, and I was kind of hesitant, but we started to branch out our programs to include those specific supports. And again, did the research. We talked to people. And then we heard from people who were struggling to find a home in the mainstream queer community, typically transgender, non binary, people of color. And so we started to tighten up our safer space policies to reflect the diversity of the people who were attending. And that's how ASPECC became what was supposed to be a space for alternative groups to host their events, to a place where you got the education on consent and sexual health and harm reduction and healthy relationships. And I'm glad it did. It's been a heck of a journey. And here we are, program still growing.